And as it says in the slide, if you need a certificate of participation, you can reach out to us via email. Wait a second. Okay. And so for those of you who are new to the Interlace project and the City Stock Nature series, we will be playing a small introductory and welcoming video so that you have a general vision of what this project is and the different entities that are part of it. So Carolina, if you can play the video by the...
Interlace es un proyecto de cooperación internacional.
Interlace is an international cooperation activity which aims to connect urban spaces in cities around Latin America and Europe. It is part of the Research and Innovation Programme, Horizon 2020, from the European Union. The Interlace Consortium is made up of 21 organizations from 11 countries, among which 6 cities stand out: Envigado, Granollers, Krakow, Chemnitz, Portoviejo, and Sebema, gathering research, making networks of cities and communication. As city networks, the Latin American Federation of Flagma Municipalities and the National Union of Local Governments contribute our connection and relations with local governments in the region so that learning and the development of tools generated within Interlace can reach the greatest amount of municipalities, thus facilitating and fostering the knowledge exchange and the exchange of experiences by way of the community of practice, Cities Talk Nature, or Cities for Nature, which we lead alongside our allies, Climate Alliance, and Cities from Local Governments United, Cities from Local Governments, UCLG, by organizing these virtual and in-person events of different natures.
Thank you very much, and sorry for the technical details. So as you see, this is a very wide project involving cities in Europe and Latin America, with a wider community of practice in which all of you are engaged. And today's specific webinar, we will be looking at one of the cities participating in the project, the city of Granollers, and another city that is more member of this wider community of City Stock Nature, Cuenca, and a member of UCLG, to look at municipal strategies for the long-term implementation of nature-based solutions, and how our cities making sure that nature-based solutions are not only designed, but also implemented, maintained, and are part of the integral long-term vision of cities and their solution and their approach to sustainable development. After sitting from these 2 cases, we will be inviting Natalia Burgos from the Ecologic Institute, one of the members and the leading member of the Interlace project, to present us some of the governance mechanisms that they have been exploring around nature-based solutions, so that we can engage in a wider discussion of what are the key lessons from those 2 cases, what facilitates the long-term implementation of nature-based solutions, and what are some of the challenges that we see in the different cities that are part of this project. So without further ado, and I please remind you to please keep your microphones closed so that we don't have much interference, especially for the recording of the session. I would like to invite Xavi Romero, environmental officer in the Granollers City Council, to share with us some of the work that the city has been doing, and kind of that long-term implementation that they have, and the municipal strategies that have been helping them kind of carry this work from one administration to the other throughout the years. Xavi, go ahead.
Juan Carlos, no sé si viste el correo, pero Xavi envió algo que se le reinició el computador, entonces no sé si ya se incorporó otra vez.
Vale, gracias Natalia, no lo había visto.
Juan Carlos, I wonder if you saw the email, but Xavi's email seems to have restarted.
start with Sofia, who I understand is still connected. So we will start with the municipality of Cuenca in Ecuador, who will be also sharing with us some of the work that they've been doing in their city and the rural areas, and kind of this linkage between their urban center and the rural areas when with their different municipal public services. Let me check because I see she is in also in echo. Let's wait for Xavi because he had some computer issues. In the meantime, I would. Okay, I see. So there's more people joining us right now. Sofia, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. It's my time.
We had some technical issues with Xavi,
Okay.
and his computer kind of failed, so he's gonna reconnect later. So if we can start with you, that would be great.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Okay, so you, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes? Well, thanks.
Ah.
Bueno, si pueden cambiar, por favor, a la interpretación en
Okay, if you can all switch to interpretation in English. I'm going to speak in this language. First of all, it's great to say hello. Thank you very much for this invitation. My name is Sofia Arce. A very warm welcome from the Council of Cuenca and its organization of national entities. We were talking about nature-based solutions, and we want to talk about our experience in the city of Cuenca, especially through our public company of drinking water, Cotapa, who I'm going to refer to many times in my presentation. So for those of you who don't know much about Cuenca, first of all, I'd just like to give you some context. We're located in Ecuador, in Latin America. Cuenca is the third biggest city in terms of population and also in terms of economic development, and at the GDP level in Ecuador, our population is just over 600,000 inhabitants, and the altitude at which it is located is between 2,300 to 4,600 meters above sea level.
ese contexto, también mencionar que Cuenca.
So with that context, I would like to mention that it is a UNESCO site, World Heritage Site since 1999. And more specifically, it has also been declared by the UNESCO a biosphere reserve of the Macizo del Cajas. Due to the Del Cajas Reserve since 2013. So it's actually a nature reserve that's managed by the municipality of Cuenca. With that context, I'd first like to talk about some of the difficulties and challenges that we have faced over the last few years, especially given the effects of climate change, specifically at the level of either floods or drought, which have affected the population at the infrastructure level, and also in terms of a loss of biodiversity and alterations in the functioning of the ecosystem, damages in basic service infrastructure, the roadways as well, road networks, and effects to housing. One of the nature-based solutions that the municipality of Cuenca has been implementing for a number of years now has been the conservation of strategic environmental areas, and that's what I'd like to go into in depth today. What do we do, and why has this alternative taken place?
Imágenes, como les mencionaba,
These are some of the images. As I mentioned before, we have extreme changes at the level of climate, either due to floods, because Cuenca has 4 rivers crossing through it, or we also have drought. And some of these droughts have led to having to ration water that we consume, so drinking water. And for this reason, a number of strategies that I'll be talking about today have been implemented. I'm going to tell you a little bit about them later. Why have these problems taken place? Well, mainly because of the expansion of the farming border, cattle farming and use of the soil, and also because they do extreme sports in this area, which is a place for water services. And there were also some mining concessions that were granted in this area. So we're referring to metals in these water replenishment areas. And so in the face of all these challenges, the municipality of Cuenca, as I said before, has implemented the preservation of strategic environmental areas. In 2019, we had 44.3% of areas for the replenishment of water protected, which in total add up to about 41,000 acres. How did we protect these areas? Well, first of all, by way of a program that's called Mutual Agreements for Water, where through a strategy with the property owners of these sites which are which belong to the citizens, we were seeking to conserve the marshes in native forests and also along the basin, so the moors. And we also created an ordinance for the creation of areas for preservation and sustainable use in the cantonal area. And in 2019, 44.3 of these protected water recharge areas had been protected, but we wanted to continue to widen these areas to make it 100%. And that's why this particular ordinance, and that's why I wanted to talk about the legal framework first. Although this nature-based solution to protect these water replenishment areas was already being protected, we wanted, or recharge areas, we wanted to widen that. We didn't just widen the number of acres to 17,000 additional acres, but we also added mechanisms through which new protection areas could be acquired, and also a funding mechanism was created, as well as a mechanism for the administration of these resources, which, you know, it's worth mentioning, is funded by the municipality of Cuenca, by the TAPA-IP and the Commission for Environmental Management, as well as those who violate this municipal ordinance. In addition to that, on February 7th, 2021, and this was a proposal that arrived from the municipality of Cuenca, we promoted a popular consultation for water to prevent large-scale metallic mining in these water recharge zones. So these are specifically zones where we guarantee water for the future. And I didn't mention this before, but why is it so important for us? Why are these water recharge areas so important to us? Because according to the master plans for drinking water for the city, by 2030, if we continue to use water the way we were doing it before, we would have a significant water deficit, especially when it comes to providing drinking water. So what has Cuenca done about this? First of all, it's monitoring the water network and monitoring the quality of water. It's also widening the protected areas. It's conserving forests, especially when it comes to native forests. And it has also sought to ensure that soil is recovered. And here I'd like to talk to you a little bit about how we have used the support of the networks from cities that have been key in this process with cooperation agencies and also development banks. Specifically, for example, with the City Climate Finance Gap Fund, which is a German fund. They're providing technical assistance to improve or widen checkpoints that check the quality of water. And TAPA-EP, the public company, is in charge of managing water comprehensively. So that includes the preservation of water sources and also the supply through pipelines, but also in the recovery of water through these sanitizing plants. And we've also had the support of international cooperation like GIZ, so that we don't just intervene in the rivers, which have always been taken care of, but also other spaces that could be, for example, the small rivers or brooks. So we're currently creating a pilot to see how we can correctly intervene in these brooks, and we're also lifting information on all the brooks in the country, because these spaces are usually privately used sites, so they have owners that have other objectives. But as you know, these kind of streams are areas used by fauna to cross to the other side, but there are also areas where they can deviate water if there are floods. And Kafnos, for example, is funding a new plant to sanitize water and guarantee water for Cuenca until 2050. So when we talk about these protected areas, why are they also so important to us? Well, not just because they are water recharge areas, but also because they are areas with a high population of mammals and endemic species. So specifically, we have the Andean bear and the last Andean tapir population of the western part of the Andean mountain range.
Mencionaba, esta empresa de agua
In addition to that, as I mentioned before, this drinking water company is in charge not only of the protection, restoration and protection of these strategic areas, but also the water services, sewage and the treatment of wastewater. And I'd also like to talk about some other strategies that are being used by ETAPA to preserve these water sources. One of those has been environmental education that is done widely with all the schools, whether they are private or public from the canton of Cuenca. They also manage dangerous waste, things like batteries, so they don't end up in the rubbish and don't pollute water. And so they collect them. They also collect oil, so cooking oils or oil from cars or that are no longer used by shops, and also the mutual agreements for water program that has been implemented for many years and has been awarded with a number of international prizes. Here I'd also like to look at the mutual agreement for water program in more depth, because we believe it's a good public-private partnership or collaboration initiative, as I was saying before. So through Etapa EP, we contacted the owners of these properties who are farmers, who work in agriculture, and we invite them and we train them so that they learn how to preserve native forests and the moors and the basin forests. And we work with community water boards, and this includes the funds for water and the parish GADs, which are in charge of coordinating the rural boards as well as the hydroelectric plant.
Estos espacios, como en el caso de las áreas de conservación. También el fortalecimiento de los sistemas de generación.
And also strengthening monitoring of climate and environmental information. We have used international cooperation and their expertise to support us and strengthen these internal processes, and also training for technical teams. We have strengthened them not just at the level of managing water technically, but also for many of the projects that we have managed, especially for organizations such as the Green Climate Fund. We have worked with our technicians so that they can take on this cross-cutting approach, namely gender for all environmental projects, and also at the municipal level, so that they can really have awareness of the environment, climate change and resilience for all municipal projects. Also environmental education, as I was saying, at the school level in particular. Oftentimes young people have that kind of strength to influence homes and help us make changes, motivate us to make changes, such as avoiding the misuse of water, and also the joint agreements for water program, mutual water agreements program. It's very important to us because it generates awareness, and it's allowed us to establish that awareness amongst the owners of these properties so that they can continue to do that. And despite not being able to buy their properties specifically, we can trust that our co-citizens will support this process of protecting, restoring and managing these areas sustainably, the strategic water recharge areas. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, Sofía, y sobre todo gracias por enfocarte.
No, thank you, Sophia, and above all, thank you for focusing on the municipal public-private partnerships and agreements that I'm sure will be an important part of the discussion that we have at a later date. I'd like to invite you, if you have any questions about this presentation, to be able to write those in the chat, and we will collect those questions after the next presentation so we can answer all the different questions you might have.
Entonces yo creo que, pues dejando así, creo que Xavi ya está de vuelta.
I think Xavi is now with us, and we can now move on to Granulaire's presentation before we collect your questions. I can see there's already a question for Cuenca specifically. We'll look at that later, but if you'd like to respond in the chat, you can also do that. Xavi Romero from the city of Granulaires, go ahead, please. A very good afternoon to you all. Thank you very much, Juan Carlos. It's really an honor for our city to be able to present here in this webinar, representing the long-term project of more than 20 years. It's linked to the previous one because the water vector is the main point here, and we're going to present our city as well as the two big nature-based solution projects in Granulaires. It's a city in Catalonia in Spain, and we are situated around 25 kilometers away from Barcelona. On these maps, the one on the right, you can see our municipality, and as you can see, from north to the south, it is crossed by the Congost River, and it has Can Cabañas at one of the points. And the two places where we have implemented these nature-based solutions from the beginning of the century give us this image here that we have generated for a web page where we basically gather all the benefits that we've achieved over time in a project that has truly transformed the city. So we're going to have two parts that we're looking at. The first is the general context of this entire long-term project with a historical presentation about the entire process, and then in the end we will have some conclusions and try to provide some advice for other cities. So this is the Congost River approximately 100 years ago, and you can see Granulaires in the back. As you can see, it's a river without vegetation, very little water. It's because it's a Mediterranean river, and that means that there are lots of different seasons, and it's basically dry in the summer and then has lots of water during the more rainier seasons. And it's quite surprising to see the potential of this river. Here we have an image from the 50s. It's the first bird's eye view image that we have. We have a free river, runs freely, and it has areas with sediments, with erosion, areas where there could be a flood. And it's a city that used to be quite far away from the riverbed, but this has changed over time. So you can see significant demographic changes after the arrival of immigrants from the south of Spain. They migrated towards Catalonia, and bit by bit, the city got closer to the river. And this isn't the only thing. Additionally, there are certain floods. I mean, then they don't really cause damages to infrastructure or goods. Neither were there any casualties or deaths, but there were some floods in 62, in 61, and bit by bit, citizens started to fear the river. But that's not it. The demographic changes mean that in 20 years it went from 15,000 inhabitants to 40,000, and this led to the creation of lots of new industries, meaning that the pollution of the river increased much more. And then around the year 74, you can see that it was a river with no life, no vegetation. There were no rivers there, not even grass. And the national press spoke about the fact that the most contaminated river of the country was the Congost, and especially the one with the where it leads or discharges into the sea. And so the citizens started to try to turn their backs to the river and live in this way. And they were scared of floods because there was permanent pollution there. And years before, people had been able to bathe there, but then all of a sudden it was a barren and dirty place. And this meant that the river was going to be channeled elsewhere, channeled off, and there was no kind of biodiversity in the place that it was channeled off to. Quite the opposite. In fact, the river was 200 meters wide, but then suddenly had 70 to 80. So it became a very kind of small river. And on top of that, pressure increased because it was a recovered terrain. And so they started to use it to create new neighborhoods, but also industrial polygons. During the year 84, it was quite sparse. And then at that point in time, it was plunged, and then the first urban plan was approved in 1984. That year, the protection of the river was approved, and also the protection of a few natural areas in the municipality, avoiding a process that had been seen in other rivers of our area, where rivers became places they used for parking. So with that urban tool, the master plan for Granollers, they managed to veto that evolution, and it's the first measure of protection. The second step of protection that was of great improvement was that finally in the year 1992, they built the organization that was the first treatment plant for the Congost River. And then a few more were developed upstream, meaning that wastewater stopped going directly to the riverbed, which led to significant issues with the quality of the water. But those first shows or signs of recovery faced an obstacle in the beginning. So they had an initial adverse situation in which they misinterpreted what the recovery of a river meant. And so what they were trying to get was a thin river that crosses the center of Granollers, and they tried to create a garden there, like an urban park within the riverbed. And this is an image from 1994 where two pathways, land pathways, were on the side of the riverbed. It was right in the middle, the river, and there was a grassy area where concerts took place and different school activities, etc. That same year, there was a very significant arrival of water, and in autumn, this area, this green area, disappeared completely. It was extremely forced in a place with a kind of natural flow, and so very quickly it was covered. And for many years, the cities of Granollers thought about that economic and empty investment that they had made, which was basically restoration projects in Granollers. Towards the end of the 90s, there were other actions for standards. They probably wouldn't be nature-based solutions because they required lots of grey infrastructure to completely be protected against floods. So this meant that there was lots of construction by the river and works that simply didn't aim to restore nature. So the next big project developed around the river to recover its natural nature. There was a project as of 2003 in Can Cabañas. It was the first project that included nature-based solutions in an area where the main landfill site for Granules waste was located. European funding was received, close it, and they made the most of this to make a project, start a project where they were building a wetland or marsh where they would treat the water. So it's basically green infrastructure that receives the water that comes out of the treatment plant for wastewater, and it basically creates a natural source where the effect of ultraviolet radiation plus a whole system designed by the Polytechnic University of Catalonia for deep waters and superficial waters considers a project. And it was more of a nature-based solution. It wasn't called that at the time, but it's very successful because it created a natural habitat. So it was the first pilot project that was satisfactory. And then there was a series of green infrastructure developed in the environmental area of Can Cabañas. Part of the treatment plant was there, and there was also a composting plant that was created to recycle lots of organic waste. An environmental education center was also created for schools, and after that, a system was built for the reuse of water that produces regenerated water, which is one big step that we currently have towards a circular and green economy of the city. So this marsh system was accompanied by other kinds of technology that are currently allowing us to have recycled water to irrigate the city, which is essential during episodes of drought, such as the one that we're currently suffering in Catalonia, where we have water restrictions. This water is the only kind that doesn't have restrictions. And this small pilot project started to grow. It hasn't just had environmental aspects, but also social benefits. And in the Can Cabañas area, we have between 400 and 600 users per day. So all this success will basically unleash the following. Probably between this year and the year 2024, it's likely that this space will expand towards the north, placing two industries in other industrial areas, once again, and recovering those industrial areas as a widening of the natural space. So they're going to turn an industrial area into a natural space, which are not very common, and they truly stand out. As you can see, we've got the process of kind of bringing down these big warehouses to put them in more industrial areas. And this widening that we see on the map with the kind of dark red rectangle here on the picture, basically another 9 nature-based solutions are going to emerge in which we try to innovate, right? So besides building a second marsh or wetland, it's much more focused on biodiversity with some of the lessons that we learned from building the first one. So we're going to create new innovative solutions as a kind of stream of biodiversification, which at the pilot scale from a number of universities, they have demonstrated that it manages to filter lots of polluting nutrients in the water. And we're also going to create a kind of flooded forest to test riverside trees that are able to extract contaminants. And so it's basically sources for the treatment plants in Granules, and the second objective is to create regenerated water for the municipalities. We're going to explain now the second big area where we have developed nature-based solutions, which is in fluvial restoration projects in the Congost River, especially in the peri-urban area. So just outside or in the outskirts of the city of Granollers. As you can see, this project started in 2008. In 2006, there were some first attempts to perform a recovery, and this has been extended to current times. It's a project that has had many years of work, and in general, we have tried to recover the vegetation of the riverside and to get rid of invasive elements. And we've been innovative by trying to withdraw obsolete water structures like concrete sleepers and walls where there was no risk, to try to make it natural and recover the fluvial dynamics of the river in that urban area. On the right, you have a scheme of 1.5 kilometers of river where 12 projects have been implemented, and the complete recovery of the longitudinal connectivity with the river has been recovered in this peri-urban area. A very graphic example would be this, where the thickening wall was integrated in an area where there was a rural area by it, and there was no kind of risk. So ecological areas have been recovered for the fauna. And these images also help to explain our governance model, and which has been based on providing with all the possible resources, the riverbed to recover biodiversity, and on the other hand, also reserve these fluvial margins so that we can tour along the river. So different social usage. Let's avoid the social usage of the river to let nature repair, and in its place, infrastructure is provided for the parks along the river so people can go and run or walk or enjoy nature. This may sound great when I explain it, but sometimes what's happened is that we'll be working on scientific publications, and so obviously you need evidence to corroborate all of this information. So I think these are the most convincing ones. On the left, you can see a map of hydromorphology of the morphology of the river in a restored area, where you can see in blue the sediment area, and in red you can see where the river has erosion, shows signs of erosion, and also you can see the classic hydromorphology map of a river with natural dynamics. So in other words, there is no kind of impediment or obstacle. Once this natural fluvial dynamic is recovered, the habitat will have the right conditions to start an ecological solution of its own accord. Then in the second picture, you can see a fish census, and this shows that our indicators are
un proyecto Next Generation donde vamos a naturalizar el río en el centro urbano. Ese río
in the urban center. We're going to try to get the river to be more natural in the center of the city, and for this reason we're going to eliminate a road that crosses over the fluvial park, and that road will be recovered as a new area linked to the river, and there's going to be a widening of the green area. And that's not it. In this urban park, we're going to get a number of streets to be urban corridors that bring nature to the center of the city, to increase areas with trees and have more permeable areas with rain garden, and also with a project for neighborhoods. So it's 4 million euros over a 4-year period, and I'm sure there'll be lots to say about it because it might be the future of European cities to show that it's easy to achieve better cities for inhabitation and for health. So finally, I'd like to try to draw some conclusions of the joint set of nature-based solutions for the long term. First of all, this is a need. So these environmental requirements to close the landfill site was a need. For example, there's also citizen needs for, people wanted to have areas where they could walk through calmly. At present, there are more than 10,000 kilometers of pathways. And these pilots that we launched initially were successful. They had very innovative ideas, and this helped them to be welcome in general by people and also politicians who made use of the funding to create a great project. Which strategies have we followed? So we have prohibited projects that incorporate we have promoted environmental and social recovery projects, not just those destined towards ecology or leisure. So in the end, they're basically projects that must go hand in hand, and that multiplies their benefits. Additionally, these projects have been accompanied by programs, plans, and local standards for their protection and management. And we've also tried to ensure that in this entire process, we have the participation of relevant actors like the university and water authorities, and also local groups linked to nature, who have played an outstanding role during the project. Which strategies failed? So, for example, the communication plans. Although in general, the recovery project results were quite good and noteworthy, and people were happy in general with the set of the projects, there were still some stereotypes about the river. They say it's dirty and water is still polluted. And there's some prejudice as well towards the vegetation. They say there's too much and it could be dangerous for flooding. And this contrasts with the scientific evidence that shows that the amount of water has improved a lot. The investment of millions of dollars has been made to get this result, and the regeneration of the riverside applies in this case because there are also some residencies next to the river, and I think this information still hasn't reached the average citizen, so we need to improve that communication. I'd like to end with some tips for other cities, if you allow us to do that. One of those is that we need to work year after year on this project, especially in the river. Let's say every single year there have been physical measures, and they've approved follow-up on certain studies. There have been studies requested and benefits as well, allowances, and this project has continued to yield results. You can't just have one specific project, because we don't just want one story to be told about the project. In the end, we need to have a clear idea about how to explain these projects, explaining their benefits. So if you have a really clear story to tell, a really clear account, then at the citizen and political level, it will be accepted much more. And for that story, you need to have scientific data. So it's important not to forget to use the help and the support of the academic sector that can really justify that economic investment and will lead to social, economic, and environmental benefits. Finally, we have to be dreamers, or really fight for these projects to last many years, so that in the end they can become a flagship strategy and one of the main policies of the cities. When you reach that level, such as that achieved with the Congost River in Granollers, it'll be much easier to open doors for other kinds of proposals and any other kinds of even adventurous projects. Because, for example, the last one that I explained, where you have to eliminate entire roads to recover the park, it's truly a daring proposal that only very solid projects that have been consolidated over the years can actually achieve. And that's all. Thank you very much for listening.
Very interesting to see those last conclusions that you had on the importance of storytelling, but also the importance of monitoring and kind of assessing the impact of the different projects that you implement year after year. We also heard from Sophia the importance of the legal frameworks to develop this kind of areas of conservation at the municipal level, and developing these like joint agreements to include the private sector as well, or private owners in the case where like that land that is being intervened is not public. As I think in the case of Granollers, most of those interventions have been on those like the river side, which is public. So very interesting to see. So those different contexts. In terms of finance, I'm gonna pick up one of the questions in the chat. You both work, like I think like you highlighted the like kind of resources coming from working with other like regional with regional cooperation, or also like development banks or the European Union. But Carolina was asking like what does make, or what can a city make to make a nature-based solution project attractive for private funding? And I think whether this is from this kind of development banks, but also from in the case of Cuenca, you were talking about these joint agreements with the private sector. So how are you looking into this in your municipalities?
Gracias, Juan Carlos. Bueno, sí, sobre todo.
Thank you, Juan Carlos. Yes, I mean, especially funding has been quite complex. I won't say it hasn't been. Mutual water agreements, this program that we have had for many years now, have worked because our work has been done closely with the owners of the properties. But this new ordinance, this new fund that was created for the purchase of new sites, also emerged as an alternative because, and I didn't mention this during my presentation, but we've had challenges with the procurement of new sites. And so basically, oftentimes to fund these works or these purchases, we went to international development banking. But when it comes to buying property, this is basically a safeguard for non-reimbursable funds or refinancing in these kinds of projects, because for banks, it potentially means that the population will become displaced. So we've had to fund it with the funds of the municipality using strategies that are very similar to what I was saying before. So these kind of rates or kind of penalties for people who violate the measure, and this has helped to buy other properties through mechanisms that gain funding. But it has honestly been quite complex to find funding and be able to execute these projects, despite the fact that citizens are highly aware of the need to conserve water and water recharge areas and the protection of wetlands. And the popular consultation that I mentioned was basically subjected to a vote where the result was yes to protect water areas. So it's been very tricky.
En el caso de Granollers,
Okay, in the case of Granollers, all of the funding of nature-based solutions has been public, and it has come from all different levels, our own at the national as well, and European levels. We do not have a lot of experience in the area of opportunities in the private sector for the implementation of nature-based solutions. But I think that we're in the first stage where these kinds of projects are promoted by the public sector. And there are plans for the private sector to start to become a new actor here. How can it benefit from this? So maybe it's too early to say, but quite probably once there is more legislation, it's possible for projects implemented related to nature-based solutions can serve to compensate for emissions and also for the corporate behavior of sustainable development of companies, that they can justify their ecological footprint by funding nature-based solutions in projects that they can perform in their own cities and municipalities. So this opens a kind of road to a win-win situation in which you can implement more nature-based solutions in public areas and private areas, and also enterprise can benefit from this through emissions compensations or their behavior in sustainable development, which could also happen.
Just hearing to you, I was reminded of this example from, I think it was Sao Paulo, that was shared in a public space conference a few weeks ago, in which while they were cleaning like all of this, big like boards, like advertisement in the streets and kind of cleaning up the landscape, what they came up with was it's more for maintenance than implementation, but it's kind of like adopting the garden or adopting the park to give the space for well, like to local companies to advertise themselves, but like in a very small way by supporting the maintenance of some of these nature-based solutions and the management of them. So I just thought I would share this example. I see that there's another concrete question for you, Xavi, in the chat regarding the river and whether you have thought of expanding the banks that were intervened. But I will let you answer that via chat, because I think we are at a good moment to kind of look into this kind of governance mechanisms and that we've been discussing. And I wanted to invite here Natalia from the Ecologic Institute and the Interlace project, because they have been looking at different governance mechanisms. In the Interlace project, for example, Envigado has a local system of protected areas that it might be kind of similar to what Cuenca has created through this ordenanza, and other examples of how nature-based solutions can be facilitated in cities. So I will let her give us an introduction, and I think she has some questions for each of you that will open up the discussion in the last 30 minutes of the webinar. So Natalia, please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Buenos días, buenas tardes a todos. I was asked to speak in English today, so I hope that that's fine. But I am, so now it's loading the presentation translated to Spanish for those that prefer to follow the slides in Spanish. So Maren today is going to help me sharing the screen to avoid any technical issues. So when you are ready. Perfect. Thank you. We see, it's okay like that, right? I guess.
Or maybe without sharing, because we see the presenter's view. Maybe if you go back and not share it, I think we can see it bigger, actually, if you don't.
Yeah, maybe because if you have the two screens, Maren, maybe you go to display settings. And
I think this is better than the other one. Yeah.
Okay, so do I go to presentation mode or?
Let's try it again.
Try it again, because if not, also you see my notes.
Oh yeah, now works. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Cool. Okay, and yes, and the presentation is already there. So yes, so I'm Natalia. I am a researcher at the Ecologic Institute located in Berlin, and I'm part of the Interlace team. And I'm very happy to be here with you, sharing some initial insights on the Urban Governance Atlas that we have been developing for the last more or less 2 years with my colleague McKenna, that is also here, and in collaborations with all the partners of Interlace. So some of you already have been active contributors of the Governance Atlas. Also, before starting, I wanted to mention that you are part of the lucky group that is having the first insights of the results of the Governance Atlas, because we are going to have the official launch in the next Cities Talk Nature event in May in Chemnitz, Germany. So I hope this is a teaser for you to then want to explore further the Governance Atlas after it's officially launched. Next, please. Thank you. So here, the message that I wanted to give with this slide is that when we started thinking about how to approach this topic of the governance of nature-based solutions, a key idea that we had in mind is that one of the key enabling conditions to take NBS political ambitions to actions is the existence of an adequate supporting policy framework. And this policy framework, it is for us, we started thinking, so how should that look? And then we said, there is not just one type of instrument that we are going to be searching for, right? We need that different, as the expert said, policy mix, where we can enable NBS to happen from different spheres of the public scene, for example, from the economical perspective, from the planning perspective. So that was one of the things. So we decided to conceptualize different policy instruments that can help mainstreaming NBS in political instruments and therefore foster NBS actions. And also another thing that we focused on is on governance. So a governance approach would mean how do we build, how those instruments would become best practices in the sense of they foster or they being able to foster collaborative perspective to include different stakeholders. So that is that we had in mind, and then we worked hard to find examples of cities around the world that are already front runners in working on these topics of fostering NBS action through policy instruments. Next. Okay, so the Urban Governance Atlas, this is an image of the beta version that is still under the last amendments before the launch. It's an interactive online open database of 200 policy instruments that is co-created, as I mentioned, with Logish, and hopefully more languages will come with another. It aims to inspire global action through good practice instruments. I'm so sorry, I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I will turn off my video. I'm having some technical issues, but then I'll keep talking without the video. I'm sorry.
No worries.
Okay, so I think you heard the last part on the inspiring global action. Then we represent diverse contexts, institutional, geographic contexts, and we foster ecologically coherent and inclusive planning. Next. So as I said, we included different types of instruments, 4 types specifically, that we classified in legislative, regulatory, and strategic instruments, economic and fiscal, agreement-based or cooperative, and knowledge communication and innovation instruments. These instruments is important to mention, so that they can be initiated by the government, but we also decided to include those instruments or initiatives that were bottom-up initiatives that were later recognized or institutionalized by the governments, because we understand that nowadays, from a governance perspective, we are not just talking about the governments are the key actors here, but also about the important role of the communities in NBS action. Next. Okay, so first, some of the first insights, as you see in the map, we have 250 instruments, and we have a focus, as I said, in Latin America and European countries. We made a big effort to reach out many different actors across the regions, and we managed to have a good coverage or geographical coverage of instruments. We have as urban master plans, green infrastructure plans, are also at the forefront of the instruments that are making MBS happen. Also, on the other hand, about the economic and talking about the financial and how MBS aspect and how MBS are financed, we have that incentives, subsidized, and payment for ecosystem services are also a main category that is being used to finance nature-based solutions in both regions. Yes, and also we found like the last category, even if sometimes there are less instruments, it was very interesting in terms of what we found, because we found a lot of examples of collaboration between municipalities, between the private sector and the public sector, also collaborations between the community and the government. So we invite you also to take a close look to this type of instruments in the Urban Governance Atlas, because they show us very good examples in terms of governance arrangements that support MBS solutions. Next. Just another short finding is that, as I said before, basically majority of the instruments that we found still are initiated by the governments. So it may be an invitation to also foster this community-based initiatives and their recognitions by the municipalities, right? And also another thing is that on the year of implementation or design and implementation of policy instruments, we can see a clear peak starting in 2010 and 13. And then of course, this has to do with important international policies that were implemented, right? So for example, in Europe, the EU Green Infrastructure Strategy, and then of course, after more or less 2014, all the MBS movement and the advocacy for MBS around Europe. Next. And yes, and to finish, because I think I'm almost out of time, is just a few first observations that McKenna and I have after checking 250 instruments of MBS, but this is just the teaser for you to be really, looking forward to the launch. So first, for the CELAC region, MBS are instruments or policy instruments are not usually labeled as such. So we don't find, for example, something like nature-based solutions, implementation strategy or law, but they are frequently used to support climate change adaptation, water management, and disaster risk reduction policies. Also, a second finding is that most instruments are designed and implemented top-down, especially legislative, regulatory, and strategic instruments. And as I mentioned, there is a high potential for more bottom-up approaches. Also, then a third finding is that there is a largely untapped potential to utilize multiple policy instruments to complement each other's, especially the ones that I mentioned on knowledge communication and innovation, as well as the agreement-based ones. And then that collaborative governance approaches at the regional scales are common in Latin America, but are more common at the local scale in the EU. And then that revenues from environmental damage charges and municipal taxes are often used to finance MBS implementations, but payments, subsidies, and incentives are more common than this incentive. So that's it. So many thanks. Next, last slide. Thank you for listening. You can contact McKenna or I in the emails that I'm showing in the screen, and then we'll keep you posted about the official launch. And I hope you are as excited as we are with this big research that we did and the 250 examples that we created for you to consult them. Thank you.
To see it. And hopefully, if you haven't included Cuenca's examples, we might get to add them afterwards as well. And it's very interesting to see the classification that you made of the different examples, because it kind of aligns to the presentation that Sophia and Xavi were doing of the more the legislative, the agreements, the communication plans. If you have any questions to them, I would let you go ahead with them. But I just going back into the reflection questions that we have given to Xavi and Sophia, because Xavi mentioned how their communication plan at some point kind of was not enough or failed. So I think I wanted to, Sophia, I'll give you some time to reflect on it, but like any kind of strategies or plan that you did that didn't work out, if you can share that with us, that would be interesting. So I'll just throw that question now, if you let you reflect. But Natalia, if you wanted to ask something specific to Xavi or Sophia, please go ahead.
Sure, and then I'll take advantage of the Spanish-speaking community, and I'll make my questions in Spanish. Xavi and Sofía, muchas gracias por la presentación. Es muy
Xavi and
interesante.
Sophia, thank you so much for your presentation. How interesting everything that you're doing. I'm asking myself, well, in terms, or if we're thinking about this, mix of policies which is necessary in order to implement nature-based solutions. From your perspective, in your own municipalities, what do you believe are the instruments which you believe are the ones that that can be highlighted the most? That without these instruments, we cannot really advance that well in order to implement NBS solutions. And well, a complementary question, which is a bit difficult, but can you think about maybe a mix of certain instruments that yes or yes you would like to highlight? If something comes to mind, that would be great. Well, in terms of instruments, I think that apart from the traditional ones, we could talk about norms or laws that can be generated, even at an ordinance level. And the traditional thing of having good planning. And other types of agreements, broader agreements as well. Like, for example, we have fluvial custodial content, which not only the municipality of Granada, but we have a custody agreement, but other municipalities in the river also participate jointly with the Catalan Water Agency, which this is a way of working at a global level. For example, working in the river makes a lot of sense because at the end, even if we work only in the city of Granada, if we work that much, if the municipalities upstream or upwaters, they don't work in unison with us, and the results will never be the most desired. Another example would be maybe talking about participative instruments. Interlace has been of great help in this regard because Interlace has forced us to create an Interlace Forum, which we call Interlace Forum, which is a work group of around 30 people that are linked to the Granada City and linked to nature. Some people provide their opinion about the development of the projects that we're working, and they give us feedback. One of the about the projects that we want to work with, one of the biggest projects that is pending, one of the biggest projects, approximately, they are also helping us define the execution criteria. So then we, from the technical perspective, and we can try to find the best solution from their opinions, from what they suggest. And at the end, this is a new perspective, and the instruments obviously should not only come from the top down, but they should be more participative, obviously, and we can hear more voices really throughout the entire implementation. I totally agree. In fact, I agree with everything that Javi says related to instruments needing to be built from the beneficiaries themselves, from the grassroots organizations themselves. And they're talking about these ordinances and the legal instruments that can be included as a reference framework for these processes. Precisely what we were talking about, the ordinance of the river basins for conservation issues. Conservation talks about the process of creating new conservation areas from the governments, from the rural governments, from the parishes and the rural governments. There, I would like to give the word over to Eduardo Villagomez from TAPA so he can complement and talk about the challenges that they have had directly and about the suggestions of our environmental management issues in order to confront these challenges. Eduardo, please go ahead. Thank you so much, Sophia. Well, good day. First of all, I apologize for not being able to use my video. Unfortunately, the computer in my office has no webcam, but I've been listening to all your questions and listening to all your talks. So compliment about Sophia's presentation, which basically encompassed all the different issues and very deeply, really, at a great depth. I think that the most important part really is related to the sustainability of the projects that we apply, and that has to do with money, with the financial sector, with the economic factors. How do we ensure that these products can actually be maintained and sustained through time? Sophia had highlighted the strategy, the procurement of land strategy in these phases. However, this is one of the strategies which is the most complicated, really, from the cost perspective, because that implies that we have to buy terrain or land. And once these lands have actually been acquired, once the land has been declared public, then that implies that we have to go through an entire strategy and movement of resources or money to be able to maintain and conserve these properties, from the hiring of personnel, from like park rangers or forest rangers, so they can control the lands and they can control the neighboring lands so that there's no intrusion of cattle farming to avoid forest fires or people having extreme sports practices that are undesired, like motorcycles or vehicles or certain undesired tourism practice, a series of problems that we have in the high mountain areas, in the cloud forest areas. All of these costs up to the moment is being paid directly by the Cuenca Water Company. However, if we continue to increase the procurement of conservation properties, there'll come a point where it can pass the balance or the equilibrium, and it won't be so more interesting for a company where the conservation is not their main purpose, really. It's simply one of the mechanisms that they have in order to conserve their raw material, which is water for them, which is the purpose of the company, which is to provide and maintain that water service, really. So you had mentioned as well what to do in order to capture, in order to attract private investment as well. And I think that that has been one of the major challenges, one of the most difficult things. The land use plan of ACOS tries to incentivize private parties to declare conservation areas for sustainable use. We haven't really had specific cases yet for the ACOS that were declared by private parties. However, now we do have a legal framework that does allow this to happen. There are certain companies that maintain a high level of responsibility or social environmental responsibility as well, that in certain cases have this green line where they seek to reduce, they try to reduce their carbon footprint and their water footprints. In certain cases, these companies want to do these things, but they're not executors. So they try to find a way to finance or support the different strategies of those of us that are executors, firsthand executors. In this sense, I can tell you a little bit about a strategy that we also maintain here, which is a fund, a water fund, which seeks to capture resources or fundraise from these public and private resources, NGOs, financiers, any type of funds, so we can have a fund that will multiply these resources and to help finance or support these efforts that these companies are doing, like the Etapa company. We have certain ideas, we have certain projects in mind that we are working with, but I believe that in order to be short with my intervention, I think that's the only thing that I would say for now. I'm not sure if there's any other additional questions. I'm open to answering anything else. Perfect. Well, thank you so much. I'm not sure, Juan Carlos, how much more time, because I'm looking at the clock here. Well, I should give you the words because I see other issues in the chat. I see quite a lot of comments because we only have 7 minutes left. Yes, correct. Yes. Well, thank you so much. Well, seeing that Paloma is sharing some super interesting resources, I'm not sure if you want to comment a little bit more about that. Paloma, can you use your microphone? Yes. Good afternoon from Spain. Well, we are a small company that came about from a master INS, where we are specialized and European grants. And we present in 2021, we present before the European Investment Bank, we presented a financial initiative with a financial vehicle in order to finance what we call biocarbon states, which is an initiative that seeks or attempts to create financial instruments so that private property owners can actually maintain their lands in their current states, reforesting and densification efforts. And what does this mean? That we're trying to have property owners from Mediterranean ecosystems so they can continue to maintain their lands and can also benefit from for ecosystemic services. And we presented this proposal to the European Investment Bank so that private companies can actually be compensated for their ecological footprint, not only their carbon footprint, but also their hydro and other ecosystemic services by using a service or a product, a financial product, which is highly regulated, continuing following the European Union's guidelines to have traceability throughout the entire company. And with this, we seek to have financial entities become more interested in the resources that private properties will be using in throughout Europe. And for this, we developed a model based on the different studies that are being done by 4 different universities in order to fundamentally evaluate 4 ecosystemic services and be able to sell it to companies in Spain. In the meantime, we're coming up with agreements with the demand. Well, with this, where we hope that we should have a pilot program for 60 million euros with an MRUB, a common MRUB amongst all landowners and all property holders, and with the purpose of creating an ecosystemic service market at a European level with a European certificate. At this particular moment, we're developing the financial instrument right now. If you have any ideas, especially those of you that are in Europe, but we're also collaborating with other institutions throughout Latin America. If you have any ideas or if you need financial help, please count on us because we've been developing several forests now. For the Agosanos forest, the Metropolitan forest, this is a more forest that is going to be created in Madrid, 1.5 billion euros in 15 years. And we can talk about everything we've researched and we can tell you everything we've done with this topic. Thank you so much. I think that is really aligned with what Xavi is saying, that perhaps we can go on that path and you guys are already starting to implement it in certain places. That's super interesting to hear about this initiative, about this work that you're doing. Well, in order, given the fact that we only have 3 minutes left, I think I'm going to start the conclusions part of this event. I know that there's a lot of interest and many questions in the chat. Well, if you have any resources to share, if you want to answer them, I invite you to answer them there in the chat if you can answer. And well, before we begin by closing, first of all, we wanted to ask you to please help us filling out the survey that we do in our webinars in order to see how we can improve our webinars in terms of times, in terms of the contents, in terms of the topics that we deal with. So you'll see in the chat, you'll see the link in the chat. So at the end or in the next few minutes, you can answer and you can give us your impressions and your recommendations. As I told you in the very beginning, this is a series of webinars for Cities Talk Lecture, and the next one is going to be done on July the 6th. And this time we will be looking at for tools, IT or technology tools, in order to plan nature-based solution within the Interlace project. There's some work that is being done with Minecraft and how to use Minecraft with the communities, trying to find out where we can implement nature-based solutions. So we're inviting some of the projects that have been working in Interlace to discuss the potential for information system and technology that will help us advance with these planning processes.